"Don't get in the elevator!" The shout echoed across the marble lobby. Raw and desperate. Eleonora Ainsworth, the formidable CEO of Ainsworth Industries, froze with her hand outstretched, her fingers inches from the polished steel button. She turned, her icy gaze landing on a janitor in a faded blue uniform, his face pale with a terror that was shockingly real. Two of her security guards immediately moved toward him, their expressions hardening. But the man, Henry Brooks, ignored them. His eyes locked on Eleonora. "Please," he begged, his voice dropping but losing none of its urgency as he took a half-step forward. "Trust me." "Not that one. Take the stairs, take any other car, just not that one." Annoyance, sharp and cold, cut through Eleonora. It was 8:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, she was due on the 60th floor to greet a delegation of Japanese investors, the final step in a deal that would define her legacy. A disruption now was intolerable. She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to her head of security, a stern man named Garrison. She dismissed the warning as the ravings of a disturbed employee and turned her back on him, pressing the call button for the adjacent elevator car. "Ma'am, you don't understand." Henry's voice rose again, laced with panic as the guards reached him, each grabbing an arm. "The hoist cable on car 4, it's been deliberately frayed." "It's designed to snap under a full load." Garrison's grip tightened on Henry's shoulder. "That's enough. You're coming with us." Eleonora stepped into the gleaming interior of car 3 without a backward glance, her entourage of assistants and junior executives filing in silently behind her. The doors slid shut, sealing her in a world of brushed metal and cool efficiency, leaving the janitor's frantic words to be swallowed by the vast, indifferent lobby. Henry struggled against the guard's iron grip as they dragged him toward a service corridor. "Listen to me. I'm not crazy. I used to be an engineer. I know what I saw." His words were a desperate, fading plea. He had seen it less than an hour ago during his early morning rounds, a glint of light where there should have been none, high up in the shaft of the executive elevator. He'd used his phone to zoom in, his blood turning to ice as the image resolved. It wasn't a simple fray. It was a precise, calculated abrasion, almost invisible to the untrained eye, placed at the cable's highest stress point. A method of sabotage so specific, so clean, it screamed of professional intent. It was a ticking time bomb, set to go off when the car was heaviest, exactly when a CEO and a group of investors would be inside. He was shoved into the sterile white security office. Garrison pushed him into a hard plastic chair. "What's your name?" "Henry Brooks. I work the night shift." "Look, you have to call maintenance, shut that car down. You have to tell her what you have to do is stay quiet," Garrison said, his voice low and menacing. "You just caused a scene in front of our most important business partners. You're suspended, effective immediately. Hand over your ID." Henry's heart plummeted. "Suspended? I was trying to save her life." "You were yelling," Garrison countered flatly. "We'll review the security footage." Now, the ID defeated, Henry slid his access card across the table. His mind wasn't on the job. It was on his son, Connor. This job, with its meager pay and decent insurance, was the only thing standing between them and disaster. Losing it was unthinkable. He felt a surge of helpless terror, not just for the woman in the elevator, but for his own small family. Upstairs, in her penthouse office, Eleonora stared out at the sprawling city, the view a testament to the empire she commanded. But she couldn't shake the janitor's words. The hoist cable. It's been deliberately frayed. It was absurd. And yet, the raw fear in his eyes had been genuine. It unsettled her, a crack in the perfect, controlled facade of her morning. Her office phone chimed. It was her lead rival on the board, Julian Croft. "Eleonora," his voice was smooth as venom. "A little drama in the lobby this morning, I hear. Do try to keep the staff in line. The investors value stability above all else." "Thank you for your concern, Julian," she replied, her tone glacial. "The situation has been handled." She hung up, her jaw tight. Julian was circling, waiting for any sign of weakness, and lately, he had plenty of ammunition. Her daughter Clara had been struggling. Since her husband's death in a car accident a year ago, Clara's anxiety had become a suffocating presence in their lives. The school called constantly. Clara suffered panic attacks that left her trembling and unable to speak. Eleonora's devotion to her daughter was absolute, but the board saw only a distraction, a vulnerability. They saw a single mother, an emotional leader, not the ruthless visionary they needed. A soft chime from her private line interrupted her thoughts. It was Clara's school. Again. Her heart clenched. "This is Eleanora Ainsworth." "Mrs. Ainsworth," the school nurse's voice was strained. "It's Clara. She's had another episode. She was in the library and just vanished. We can't find her anywhere in the building." The floor seemed to drop out from under Eleonora. Clara wasn't at school. She had a habit, when scared, of running to the one place she felt safe, her mother's office. A wave of nausea washed over her. Clara, her terrified, fragile daughter, was somewhere in this building. A building where a man had just screamed a terrifying warning about a sabotaged elevator. Downstairs, Henry Brooks was escorted to the building's exit, his suspension paperwork clutched in his hand. He was locked out, powerless. He stared up at the gleaming tower of glass and steel, his mind racing. He had to get back in. He had to find proof. He had to make someone listen before it was too late. He didn't know it yet, but high above, a scared little girl was hiding, and the life of the woman who had just dismissed him now depended on him breaking every rule to save them all. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, seized Eleonora. The sprawling city outside her window blurred into a meaningless watercolor. Clara was here, in this building, a frightened 9-year-old girl, lost in a 60-story labyrinth of steel and glass, and one of its elevators was a death trap. The janitor's warning, which she had dismissed as a nuisance, now replayed in her mind as a dire prophecy. Her first instinct was to scream, to sound every alarm, to tear the building apart until she found her daughter. But she couldn't. The investors were in the main conference room. Julian Croft was waiting for her to crack. Any hint of panic would be a weapon used against her. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, forcing the terror down, converting it into icy resolve. This was the curse of her position. Her power demanded a performance of calm, even as her world was imploding. She buzzed her assistant. "Charlotte, cancel my next hour. A personal matter." Her voice was tight, but steady. Next, she called Garrison, the head of security. "We have a situation," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "My daughter Clara is missing from her school. We believe she is in the building. I want a level 1 search, discreet and immediate. Check all common areas, lounges, and lobbies first. No alarms, no panic. Is that understood?" "Understood, Ms. Ainsworth," Garrison replied, his voice a flat line of professionalism. "We'll find her." Eleonora hung up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She trusted Garrison's competence, but she knew his search would be methodical, by the book. He didn't know Clara. He didn't know her daughter's talent for finding the smallest, quietest, most forgotten corners to hide in when the world became too loud. Outside, on the windswept plaza, Henry Brooks clutched his suspension notice, the paper a flimsy testament to his powerlessness. He couldn't go home. He couldn't leave, knowing that ticking clock was still counting down. He circled the building, his mind honed by years of engineering and janitorial work, mapping its veins and arteries. He knew the loading docks, the waste disposal chutes, the service entrances that were blind spots for the main security cameras. He spotted his chance at the rear loading bay. A catering van was making a delivery for the investors' luncheon. The bay was a chaotic ballet of rolling carts and shouting workers. Henry, in his familiar blue uniform, looked like he belonged. He slipped into the stream of bodies, keeping his head down, and merged with the shadows of the cavernous space. No one gave him a second glance. He was just a janitor, invisible. Once inside, he moved through the building's underbelly with a quiet confidence. These service corridors were his domain. He bypassed the main elevator banks, heading for a cramped service lift at the far end of the basement. His destination, the 61st floor, the elevator machine room. He needed a clear, undeniable photograph of that sabotaged cable, a picture that even a CEO in denial couldn't ignore. The search for Clara was proving fruitless. Garrison's teams had swept the first 20 floors with nothing to show for it. Eleonora paced her office, the polished marble floor feeling like a cage. She watched the security feeds on her monitor, her eyes scanning crowds, looking for a small figure with blonde hair. Every minute that passed was a fresh wave of agony. She thought of Clara, alone and terrified, and felt a piece of her own composure crumble. Henry reached the 59th floor, 2 levels below his target. He decided to take the service stairs the rest of the way to avoid any record of the lift going to the top floor. As he pushed open the heavy fire door into a dusty, little-used corridor, he heard a sound, a tiny, muffled sob. He froze, every sense on high alert. It came again, the unmistakable sound of a child trying to cry without being heard. He followed the sound down the hallway, past old filing cabinets and forgotten office furniture draped in plastic sheets. It led him to the end of the corridor, to the door of an old records room that hadn't been used in years. He pushed the door gently. It wasn't locked. The room was dark, smelling of old paper and dust. In the far corner, huddled between a stack of boxes and the wall, was a small girl. She had her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her arms. It was Clara. Henry's heart ached. He saw his own son, Connor, in her small, trembling frame. He knew better than to startle her. He didn't step into the room. He simply sat down in the hallway, just outside the doorway, making himself small. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft and low, the way he spoke to Connor after a nightmare. "You found a really good hiding spot. I bet no one else could find it." Clara flinched, pulling herself tighter into a ball. She didn't look up. "My name is Henry," he continued gently. "My son Connor, he's about your age. When he gets scared, he likes to build forts out of blankets, says it makes the world quieter." He paused. "It's very loud out there today, isn't it?" Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Clara lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear. She stared at the man in the janitor's uniform, a man who wasn't shouting or grabbing, a man who was just sitting. My daddy said this was the quietest corner," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. Henry's breath caught. He was sitting in a forgotten hallway, trying to save a woman who didn't believe him, and he had just found her terrified child, a child who was hiding in a place only her late father knew. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was the only person in the world who knew where Clara Ainsworth was. He had the proof for the elevator waiting 2 floors up, but he now held something far more important in his hands: the CEO's heart. The weight of Henry's discovery settled on him, heavy and profound. 2 floors above, the evidence he needed to save a company was waiting. But here, in this dusty, forgotten room, was the evidence he needed to save a family. He chose the family. "Your daddy had good taste in quiet corners," Henry said, his voice a low rumble that didn't echo. "It's important to have a place like that." Clara watched him, her wide, tear-filled eyes assessing the sincerity in his. She wiped her nose on the sleeve of her school uniform. "He brought me here when the meetings got too loud. We'd pretend we were spies." "Spies, huh?" Henry managed a small smile. "That's a good game. Connor and I, we usually just pretend to be superheroes. It's a lot messier." He saw a flicker of curiosity in her expression and pressed gently. "Your mom is looking for you. She's very worried. I can take you to her if you want. We can use the back ways, the spy ways. No one will even see us." He offered his hand, palm up, and waited. It was a gesture of patience, one he had learned from years of coaxing a little boy to take medicine or go to bed. He didn't move, didn't push. He let the choice be hers. After a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, Clara's small, trembling hand reached out and rested in his. His calloused fingers closed gently around hers. It felt like holding a fragile bird. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," he whispered back. "Let's go." He led her out of the room, his every movement slow and deliberate. He didn't have proof of the sabotage, not yet, but he now had something more powerful: trust. They moved through the service corridors, a strange pair, the invisible janitor and the CEO's lost daughter. Twice they heard the telltale crackle of a security radio approaching. Both times, Henry pulled Clara into a dark alcove, shielding her with his body, his hand held over her mouth in a universal sign for shh. She didn't struggle. She understood the game. They were spies. Finally, they reached the service elevator at the end of the executive floor corridor. The ride up to the 60th floor was silent. When the doors opened, they stepped out into the hushed, carpeted hallway that led to Eleonora's office suite. The air here was different, filtered, expensive, and tense. Eleonora's assistant, Charlotte, sat at her desk, her face a mask of professional anxiety. She looked up, and her eyes widened in shock as she saw Henry, the suspended janitor, walking toward her holding Clara's hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she began, rising from her chair. "You're not allowed on this floor." But Clara let go of Henry's hand and ran past the desk. "Mommy." The door to the inner office swung open. Eleonora stood there, her face pale, her composure finally shattered. She had been staring at a blank security monitor, imagining the worst, when she heard her daughter's voice. Relief, so powerful it buckled her knees, washed over her. She dropped to the floor and swept Clara into her arms, burying her face in her daughter's hair, holding on as if she might float away. "Oh, Clara, baby, I was so scared." "Where were you?" she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Over Clara's shoulder, she saw Henry standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved. He was just watching, giving them their moment. After a few seconds, she gently pulled back from Clara and rose to her feet, her CEO persona slowly reasserting itself, but the ice in her eyes had melted. "Thank you," she said, her voice still trembling slightly. "Garrison's men have been searching for an hour." "Where? How did you find her?" "I heard her crying," Henry said simply, "in an old records room on the 59th floor. She said it was her father's quiet corner." Eleonora's breath hitched. Of course, a place she had completely forgotten, a place only her late husband, and now this janitor, knew about. Her gaze shifted from gratitude to a dawning, unnerving respect. "I owe you a debt I can't possibly repay," she said, her voice low and sincere. "You don't owe me anything," Henry replied, his tone firm, "but you do need to listen to me." Now he stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "I tried to tell you this morning. I don't have a clear shot, not from the lobby, but I got this." He held out the phone. On the screen was the grainy, pixelated image he'd taken that morning. It was blurry, indistinct to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for, but Henry pointed to a tiny, unnaturally bright spot on the thick steel cable. "That's a clean cut," he said, his voice dropping. "It's been scored, Miss. Ainsworth deep. It's meant to look like wear and tear, but it's not. It's designed to fail when the elevator is carrying maximum weight. Like, for instance, when it's filled with a group of investors." Eleonora stared at the photo. She looked at her daughter, safe and clinging to her side. She looked at the janitor, his eyes burning with an intensity she couldn't deny. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The warning, Clara's disappearance, the convenient timing of the investor's visit, Julian's smug phone call. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was an attack. Her blood ran cold. The man she had dismissed, the man her security had thrown out, hadn't just tried to warn her. He had saved her daughter, and now he was trying to save her life. "Garrison!" She snapped into her intercom, her voice hard as diamonds. "Shut down Executive Elevator Car 4, immediately. Tell me it's done the second it's offline, and I want the chief maintenance engineer in my office in 5 minutes. No excuses." She looked at Henry, her eyes locking with his. The wall between CEO and janitor had crumbled to dust. In its place was a fragile, terrifying, and unspoken alliance. "You're not suspended anymore," she said, her voice a low command. "You work for me now, and you're going to help me find the person who is trying to kill me." The 5 minutes Eleanor had given felt like an hour. Clara sat quietly on the plush sofa, coloring in a book Charlotte had produced, a fragile island of calm in a rising sea of tension. Henry stood near the window, his posture betraying none of the turmoil inside him. He had gone from a suspended janitor to the CEO's impromptu advisor in the span of 30 minutes. His world had tilted on its axis. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Ainsworth, Car 4 is offline and secured. Mr. Evans, the chief engineer, is here." "Send him in," Eleanor commanded. Mike Evans scurried in, a thin, perpetually nervous man who looked like he'd just been told the sky was falling. He clutched a tablet to his chest like a shield. "Miss Ainsworth, Garrison said it was an emergency shutdown. My system shows no faults, no alarms. The car was running perfectly this morning." "Your system is wrong, Mike," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously calm. She gestured toward Henry. "This is Henry Brooks. He'll be assisting you with a manual inspection." Evans blinked, his gaze flicking from the CEO to the man in the janitor's uniform. Confusion and a hint of indignation crossed his face. "Assisting me? With all due respect, I've been chief engineer here for 15 years. I think I know how to inspect a cable." "Henry is a former certified elevator engineer," Eleanor stated, cutting off any further protest. "He believes one of the hoist cables on Car 4 has been deliberately compromised. You're going to take him to the machine room along with Garrison, and you are going to listen to everything he says. You will report your findings only to me. Is that clear?" The color drained from Evans' face. "Compromised? As in sabotage?" "That's what we're going to find out," she said. "Go." Now Evans nodded numbly and led the way out, with Henry and a grim-faced Garrison following. Left alone with her daughter, Eleanor felt the adrenaline begin to wane, replaced by a chilling fear. The sabotage was real. She had felt it the moment Henry showed her the photo. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a targeted, sophisticated attack. It meant someone in her inner circle, someone with immense access and knowledge, wanted her dead or disgraced. Her mind immediately went to Julian Croft. He was ambitious, ruthless, and had the most to gain. But was he smart enough to pull this off? This level of technical sabotage required a specific expertise. 40 minutes later, the three men returned. Evans looked ashen, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Garrison's face was a mask of cold fury. It was Henry who spoke first, his voice steady and factual. "It's worse than I thought," he said, handing his phone to Eleonora. It was now filled with a dozen high-resolution images taken from the top of the elevator car. The damage was undeniable. A single, thick steel cable showed a deep, clean score mark, with several smaller strands meticulously severed around it. "The main cut is about 70% through the cable's core," Henry explained, pointing to one of the images. "It's positioned to fail at the sheave, right when the car experiences maximum load stress, like during a sudden stop or a full-capacity ascent. But look here," he zoomed in on the smaller, frayed wires. "These aren't random breaks. They were snipped, probably with a pair of high-torque cable cutters. This was done to mimic stress fraying, to make it look like a maintenance failure over time." Evans swallowed hard, finally finding his voice. "He's right. I've never seen anything like it. It's professional, clean. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They knew our inspection schedules, our sensor tolerances. The system wouldn't flag this until it was too late. Who has access to the machine room? Eleonora's voice was like ice. Me, my 2 senior techs, and executive-level security, Evans stammered. The access logs are all electronic. Pull them, she ordered Garrison. Cross-reference them with anyone who had access to the maintenance schedules for the last month. I want a list of every single person who could have been in that room, and I want it an hour ago. Garrison nodded and left without a word. Eleonora turned her attention back to Henry. The gulf between them, of wealth, of status, of power, had vanished. In this room he was the expert, and she was the one who needed him. How? She asked, the question hanging in the air. How could someone do this without being detected? Henry took a breath. They'd need a window of about 20 minutes, probably in the dead of night when the building is quietest. They'd need the right tools, and they'd need to know how to override the door sensors to the machine room without logging an alert. He paused, his expression grim. This wasn't a disgruntled employee with a grudge, Miss Ainsworth. This was planned by someone who knows this building as well as I do, an engineer, or someone who hired one. The implications were staggering. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. They were inside the command center. They wore a suit, carried a key card, and probably smiled at her in the hallway. She looked at Clara, who was now fast asleep on the sofa, her small face peaceful. A fierce, protective anger rose in Eleonora, hot and clarifying. They hadn't just come for her company. They had put her daughter at risk. They had threatened the one thing in the universe she truly loved, and for that, there would be no forgiveness. Henry, she said, her voice low and resolute, I need you to stay. Not as a janitor, as a consultant. Your official title will be Special Projects Coordinator, Office of the CEO. You will have full access, you will report only to me. And you will help me tear this company apart until we find the person responsible. Henry stared at her, stunned. A new title. Full access. It was a world away from a mop and bucket. But he saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a plea. He thought of his son, Connor, and the precarious life he was trying to build for them. Then he looked at the sleeping girl on the couch. I'll do it, he said, but on one condition. Eleonora raised an eyebrow. You call me Henry. A small, almost imperceptible nod. All right, Henry, Eleonora said. The use of his first name hung in the air, dismantling a barrier that an hour ago had seemed a mile high. For the first time that day, Henry felt like he was standing on solid ground. The moment was broken by Garrison's return. He held a tablet, his expression grim. I have the access logs for the machine room, level 61, for the past 30 days. Eleonora took the tablet, her eyes scanning the list. Henry moved to stand beside her, close enough to see the screen. It was a short list, as Evans had said. Mike Evans himself, 2 senior techs, Paul Simmons and a younger man named Ben Carter, and a handful of Garrison's own security supervisors. And then one name that made Eleonora's breath catch, Julian Croft. Julian was in the machine room? She asked, her voice sharp. Garrison pointed to the entry. 3 nights ago, 11:47 p.m. to 11:58 p.m., the log notes, server access for data analytics project. The machine room has a server rack, Henry confirmed quietly. It's plausible, but it's also the perfect cover. 11 minutes is more than enough time for someone who knows what they're doing. Eleonora's mind raced. It was almost too perfect, too obvious. Julian was her primary rival, the one who stood to gain the most. But this felt sloppy. Julian was a predator, but a careful one. Would he really use his own keycard? Henry shook his head, looking away from the screen. This isn't the answer, he said. An electronic log is just a story someone wants you to read. Keycards can be cloned, passcodes can be stolen, alibis can be built. This list tells us who had official access. It doesn't tell us who was actually in the room. What are you suggesting? Eleonora asked, turning her full attention to him. We go back. To the machine room, Henry said. The person who did this was focused on the cable. They were careful, but they weren't thinking about a janitor. They weren't thinking about someone who knows what a clean floor looks like, or how dust settles, or the scuff marks a specific tool cart leaves behind. They left a physical trail. I guarantee it. Eleonora looked from Henry's determined face to her sleeping daughter. He was right. The digital world was compromised. She had to trust the physical one. Garrison, seal that room. No one goes in or out without my direct authorization. Not Evans, not his techs, no one. She then turned to her intercom. Charlotte, reschedule my meeting with the investors. Tell them we've encountered a critical infrastructure issue that requires my personal oversight. Frame it as an example of our rigorous safety protocols. And get my car brought to the front. She scooped a still sleeping Clara into her arms. The child felt impossibly light, a fragile treasure in a world of threats. I have to get her home, she said to Henry, her voice softening. I'll be back within the hour. I want you to go to that room. Take Garrison. Look for what you described. Look for the story the logs aren't telling. Henry simply nodded. I will. As Eleonora carried her daughter through the quiet office, she felt the weight of her isolation. She was surrounded by employees, security, and executives. Yet the only person she truly trusted was the man she'd had thrown out of her building that morning. Driving through the city, the familiar streets felt alien. The sleek lines of her Porsche were a cocoon, but she felt exposed, vulnerable. She got Clara home and into bed, her nanny watching with concerned eyes. The house was a fortress of wealth and security, but the enemy wasn't outside. They were already in the castle. She couldn't plan her next move from her office, a place that was now a crime scene. She couldn't use company phones or emails. Every system she commanded was potentially compromised. She needed a safe place, a neutral ground, a war room where the walls weren't listening. Back in her car, the engine a low thrum in the quiet suburban street, she felt a profound sense of being adrift. Who could she turn to? Her board was circling. Her security could have a traitor in its ranks. Her chief engineer had been blind to the threat under his nose. Then she thought of Henry, a man with nothing to gain and everything to lose, who had stood his ground. A man who saw things others missed. A man who understood the building's secrets not from a spreadsheet, but from the ground up. She needed him. Not just his expertise, but his perspective. She pulled out her phone, accessed the company's HR database with her highest level clearance, and found his employee file. An address appeared on the screen, a simple street name in a neighborhood miles away, a world away, from her own. Without a second thought, she typed the address into her car's navigation system. The crisp, digital voice announced the route, plotting a course from her gilded cage to the one place the enemy would never think to look for her, to the home of her janitor. The screen glowed, illuminating her determined face as she pulled away from the curb, leaving her safe, sterile world behind. The machine room on the 61st floor was a world of humming, orderly power. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and oil. When Garrison unlocked the door, breaking the official's seal Eleonora had ordered, he and Henry stepped into a space that felt both sterile and sacred. This was the building's heart, and someone had tried to poison it. Garrison, a man accustomed to digital threats and human deception, watched as Henry ignored the computer terminals and access panels. Instead, the janitor, the special projects coordinator, knelt, his eyes inches from the polished concrete floor. He ran a gloved hand over the surface, his gaze sweeping the area with a focus Garrison had only ever seen in forensic specialists. "What are you looking for?" Garrison asked, his voice low. "A mistake," Henry answered without looking up. They focused on the cable and the computer logs. They wouldn't expect someone to care about the floor. He moved slowly, methodically, his path spiraling inward from the door toward the massive hoist motor. He passed the server rack Julian Croft had supposedly accessed, his eyes barely giving it a glance. He was reading a different kind of map, one made of dust, scuffs, and shadows. After 10 minutes of near-total silence, he stopped. He pointed to a dark, recessed corner behind a bank of capacitors, a space no wider than a foot. "There," he said. Garrison peered into the gloom. He saw nothing but a thin layer of settled dust. "What is it?" "It's what's not there," Henry corrected. He pulled a small, high-intensity flashlight from his pocket, the kind he used for checking behind boilers. He angled the beam low, almost parallel to the floor. And then Garrison saw it. A faint, partial outline. The edge of a shoe print, disturbed but still visible, in a place no one would ever have a reason to step. But it was something else that held Henry's attention. "Look closer," Henry murmured, aiming the light at the floor just beside the print. "The dust. See the way it glitters?" Garrison squinted. The normal gray dust of the machine room was faintly mixed with something else, minuscule metallic specks that caught the light with a coppery, almost reddish sheen, entirely different from the silver-gray of the steel cables overhead. "That's not from the hoist cables," Henry said, his voice tight with discovery. "And it's not from the server casings. This is residue. Shavings from a high-carbon steel blade, probably coated with titanium nitride, the kind used in specialized hydraulic cable cutters. Not something Evan's crew keeps in their standard toolkits." He pulled a small evidence bag from his pocket, a habit from a past life he never thought he'd need again. Carefully, he collected a sample of the dust. Whoever was here used a tool they brought with them, and they left a souvenir. Garrison stared, a slow, dawning respect on his face. He had been looking at a list of names on a screen. Henry had found the ghost's footprint. Miles away, the city's landscape shifted. The gleaming glass towers and manicured parks of downtown gave way to older neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks, overhead power lines, and houses that stood shoulder to shoulder, each with a story. Eleonora's Porsche, a machine of sculpted metal and quiet power, felt like a spaceship that had landed on a foreign planet. People on front porches stopped talking to watch it glide by. Kids on bikes paused to stare. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. This was a world she flew over in her helicopter, a demographic she analyzed in board meetings. She had never driven through it. She had never breathed its air. The navigation system's calm voice announced, "Your destination is on the right." And there it was, a small, two-story house, clad in faded blue clapboard siding, with a sagging but welcoming front porch. It was an old, detached American-style house, exactly as one might picture it, with a slightly overgrown lawn and a sturdy oak tree guarding the front walk. It was humble, it was real, and it looked more like a home than her sprawling, silent mansion ever had. For a moment, she hesitated. What was she doing here? She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, showing up unannounced at a janitor's front door. It was insane. It was a breach of every protocol, every rule of the world she commanded. But her world was a lie. Her protocols had failed her. The rules had been written by the enemy. Her foot pressed the brake. The Porsche slowed, its tires crunching softly on the asphalt as she pulled to a stop directly in front of the little blue house. She cut the engine. The sudden, profound silence was broken only by the distant sound of a dog barking. She took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out. Eleanora Ainsworth, in her $1,000 suit and heels that were completely impractical for a cracked concrete sidewalk, stood on the curb and looked at Henry Brooks's house. It was a surrender and a declaration of war, all in one. She was here because this was the one place her enemies would never look. She was here because the man inside was the only one she could trust. She walked up the short path, her heels clicking a sharp, alien rhythm on the pavement, and raised her hand to knock on the door. The knock was followed by the sound of scuffling feet, then a chair being dragged. A moment later, the door creaked open a few inches, held by a brass security chain. A pair of wide, curious blue eyes, startlingly similar to Henry's, peered out. It was a boy, no older than Clara, with a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice possessing the serious, formal tone of a child trying to sound like an adult. He eyed her expensive suit, then craned his neck to get a better look at the Porsche gleaming at the curb. Whoa! Eleonora, who could command a room of 100 executives with a single glance, felt a smile touch her lips. "Hello, I'm Eleonora. Is your dad home?" The boy, Connor, shook his head. "He's at work. He's a janitor." He said the word with a simple, unashamed pride that struck Eleonora more deeply than any corporate title. "Are you his boss?" "I am," she confirmed. "My name is Eleonora Ainsworth." Connor's eyes widened further in recognition. He'd likely heard the name from his father. "You should probably come in," he said, a newfound sense of duty in his voice. He fumbled with the chain, slid it free, and opened the door. "Dad says we don't leave guests on the porch." She stepped inside. The house was a world away from the sterile perfection of her own. It was small, but it was alive. The air smelled of cinnamon and old books. A half-finished Lego creation sat on the floor, surrounded by colorful bricks. Drawings, vibrant and chaotic, were taped to the refrigerator door. On a worn armchair, a textbook lay open, its page marked with a pencil. It was a home filled with love, learning, and the beautiful, messy evidence of a child's life. It felt more real than anything she had known in years. "Can I get you a juice box?" Connor offered, pointing toward the kitchen. "I'm all right, thank you, Connor," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'll just wait for your dad, if that's okay." She sat on the edge of a sturdy but faded sofa. Connor, deeming his host duties complete, returned to his Lego project on the floor, occasionally glancing up at her as if she were a rare and fascinating creature that had wandered into his habitat. An hour stretched by. In the quiet of the small living room, the tension of the day began to seep out of Eleonora. The corporate battles, the betrayals, the ever-present threat. It all seemed to recede, replaced by the simple, comforting sounds of a home. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of Lego bricks, the murmur of a television from a neighbor's house. Just as the sun began to dip below the rooftops, the front door opened again. Henry walked in, looking exhausted, his shoulders slumped with the weight of the day. He stopped dead in the doorway, his keys still in his hand, his eyes locking on Eleonora Ainsworth sitting on his couch. He looked from her to the Porsche visible through the window, and then to his son on the floor. For a moment, he looked utterly lost, as if he'd walked into the wrong life. "Miss Ainsworth, Eleonora," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" Connor scrambled to his feet. "I let her in, Dad. She's your boss." "It's okay, son," Henry said, his mind catching up to the surreal scene. Eleonora rose. "My office isn't safe," she said simply, her voice devoid of its usual corporate crispness. "My home isn't either. This was the only place I could think to go where they wouldn't be listening." The weight of her words settled in the small room. This humble house had just become the command center for the fight of their lives. Henry's exhaustion vanished, replaced by the sharp focus he'd shown in the machine room. "I found something," he said, pulling the sealed evidence bag from his jacket pocket and placing it on the coffee table between them. The reddish, glittering dust seemed to glow under the warm light of a table lamp. He explained what he and Garrison had found, the partial shoe print, the metallic shavings. "This is our first real piece of physical evidence," he said, his voice low and intense. "It tells us they used a non-standard tool, which means we can trace it. Industrial suppliers for that kind of equipment have records. It's not something you buy at a hardware store." Eleonora stared at the bag. It was tangible proof of the unseen enemy. "Julian Croft," she said, the name tasting like poison. "He was on the access log." Henry shook his head. "Too easy. He's the obvious suspect, which makes me think he's the distraction. The person who did this is smarter than that. They're an engineer, or they have one on their payroll. They wouldn't leave a trail that clean unless they were framing someone. "So, what's our next move?" she asked, deferring to his expertise completely. "We analyze this sample," he said. "I have a friend who runs a small materials science lab. He owes me a favor. He can give us a chemical breakdown of the metal shavings. That can help us narrow down the manufacturer of the tool. It's a long shot, but it's a start." He then looked around his own living room at the CEO of Ainsworth Industries standing beside his son's Lego castle. "And we work from here. We can't trust your office network. We use burner phones. We communicate offline. We assume everything is being watched." It was a spy thriller protocol, laid out in a working-class living room. Eleonora nodded, a new, fierce resolve hardening her features. They were no longer reacting. They were hunting. The next morning, the small house felt charged with a strange, new energy. It was a fortress, a command center, and a daycare. While Henry made pancakes, his movements efficient and grounding, Eleonora sat at his small kitchen table, a burner phone to her ear, her voice a low, authoritative hum. Connor and Clara, brought over by a trusted nanny before dawn, were building an elaborate Lego metropolis on the living room floor, their quiet chatter a stark contrast to the silent war being waged just feet away. "Garrison," Eleonora murmured, "I need a list." All external engineering contracts from the last 2 years involving specialized hydraulic or tensile equipment. Frame it as a cost analysis audit. I want supplier names, project managers, and payment authorizations, and I want it done quietly. Use a junior analyst, someone who won't ask questions. She listened for a moment, then added, "And Garrison, do a soft background check on Mike Evans. Look for any unusual financial activity. Gambling debts, large purchases, anything." She ended the call, her expression unreadable. To trust her head of security was a risk, but a calculated one. She had to delegate to keep the enemy from noticing her own movements. Henry placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. She looked up, startled, as if pulled from a different world. "You need to eat," he said simply. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. As she ate, the simple, warm food felt like a small act of rebellion against the cold, calculated betrayal she was fighting. Later that morning, Henry took the evidence bag and drove to an unassuming industrial park on the other side of town. He met his friend, Sam, a wiry man with sharp, intelligent eyes, in the alley behind a lab that smelled of solvents and hot metal. "You're calling in the big one, huh?" Sam said, taking the bag. "This better not be police business, Henry. I've got grants to protect." "It's not," Henry assured him. "It's personal. I just need to know what this is and where it might have come from." No questions asked. Sam studied his old friend's face, saw the lines of worry and resolve, and nodded once. "I'll run it through the mass spectrometer. Give me a few hours. Back at the house." The fragile peace was beginning to fray. The children, sensing the underlying tension, grew restless. A squabble broke out over a prized Lego piece. Clara, overwhelmed, dissolved into tears, her breath catching in the familiar, frightening rhythm of an anxiety attack. Eleonora rushed to her side, but her usual reassurances felt hollow. It was Henry who knelt, not as a CEO's ally, but as a father. "Hey," he said softly to both children. "Building a city is tough work. Even the best engineers argue. You know what my dad used to tell me? When you can't agree on how to build up, you build out. You make a bridge to a new part of the city." He handed them a long, flat Lego piece. "Let's build a bridge." The simple wisdom worked. The tears subsided, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Eleonora watched, a painful knot tightening in her chest. He was a natural father. He was present, patient, and calm in a way she, with all her power and resources, had never learned to be. Her late husband had been the calm one. Since his death, she had felt like a solo pilot in a storm, and she was starting to realize she had been flying blind. The burner phone on the counter buzzed. It was Garrison. I have the initial procurement list, he said. There are 17 contracts that fit the profile, but something else. Mike Evans' financials are clean, too clean. No debt, but also no investments, no major assets. He lives in a small rental. For a man in his position, it's like he's a ghost. A ghost. The word chilled her. Before she could process it, the other burner phone rang. Henry answered. It was Sam. "Henry, you were right to bring this to me." Sam's voice crackled with excitement. "This isn't just tool residue. It's a custom alloy. High-carbon steel, chromium, and a trace amount of vanadium, coated with a proprietary titanium nitride layer. It's incredibly strong and designed for minimal friction." "Can you trace it?" Henry asked, his heart pounding. "Better. The vanadium has a specific isotopic signature. It's like a fingerprint. It comes from a mine used exclusively by one company for their high-stress application tools. A German firm called Stahlwerk Dynamics." Eleonora's head snapped up. She knew the name. "Garrison," she said into her own phone. "Search the contract list." "Is Stahlwerk Dynamics on it?" There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Yes," Garrison said, his voice tight. "They have a single massive contract from 18 months ago. For the retrofitting of the primary hoist components on all executive elevators." Henry and Eleonora locked eyes across the kitchen. This was it, the direct link. "Who was the project manager on that contract?" Eleonora asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who signed off on it?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. Henry held his breath. "It wasn't Julian Croft," Garrison said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "The authorization came from the lead engineer. The project was managed and signed off on by Mike Evans." The name hung in the air of the small kitchen, thick and suffocating. Mike Evans, not a rival, not a corporate raider, but a man Eleonora had trusted for 2 decades. He had been a pallbearer at her husband's funeral. The betrayal was so profound. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. "It can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. "Mike? He has no reason. He's been with us since the beginning. He was Richard's friend." "Sometimes the ones who stand the closest are the best at hiding," Henry said, his voice a low anchor in her spinning world. "His financials are a ghost's. That's not a man with no motive. That's a man who knows how to hide his tracks. He's been paid, and he knows how to make the money disappear." The pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. Mike Evans had the access, the expertise, and the trust. He could have sabotaged the elevator himself or overseen it. He could have planted the evidence to frame Julian Croft. He had played them all perfectly. "The board meeting," Eleonora said, her mind racing. "He was there. He sat right next to Julian, and he looked just as shocked as everyone else." She closed her eyes, picturing it. He even put a hand on Julian's shoulder, a gesture of support. "The man is a predator, and a smart one," Henry added. "We can't go to the board with this. It's still just a name on a contract and some metal dust. It's not enough. He'll deny everything, destroy the real evidence, and disappear." "So we set a trap," Eleonora said, her voice turning to ice. The grief was hardening into rage. "We make him think we're walking into his trap, but we spring our own." She picked up the burner phone and dialed Garrison. "The plan has changed," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want you to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. The agenda is urgent security matters. Leaked to a few key people, the ones you know are gossips, that you've found definitive proof linking Julian Croft to an offshore account that received a large payment." "Ma'am, we haven't found that," Garrison protested. "I know," she said, "but Mike Evans doesn't. We are going to shine a very bright spotlight on Julian Croft. We are going to make it look like the case is closed. I want Mike to feel safe. I want him to get comfortable. And then what?" "Then," Henry put in, leaning closer to the phone, "we watch him. When he thinks he's won, he'll make a mistake. He'll contact his partner, or he'll try to tie up one last loose end. And we'll be waiting." After they hung up, An unnerving quiet settled over the house. The children were asleep upstairs, their breathing a soft, steady rhythm of innocence. In the living room, the two adults felt the full weight of the conspiracy pressing in on them. "Richard," Eleanora said, the name a ghost on her lips. "My husband. He was the chief engineer before Mike. He's the one who hired him. They worked together for years." She looked at Henry, her eyes filled with a new, dawning horror. "Richard died in a car accident. The police said it was black ice on an overpass. His brakes failed." Henry's expression was grim. He didn't have to say anything. The question was a living thing between them. Was it an accident? "He was working on something before he died," she continued, her voice trembling. "A private project. He was worried about something. He called it a fundamental design flaw in a new system. He was paranoid, encrypting his files, working late. I thought it was just the pressure of his job." She stood up, pacing the small room. "He kept his work on a separate hard drive, an old one. It's in his study at home. I tried to access it after he died, but it's password protected. I didn't know the password, and it hurt too much to keep trying." Henry's gaze was steady. "Maybe it's time to try again. I have to go back there," she said, more to herself than to him. "To the house. I need that drive." "It's not safe for you to be alone," he said immediately. "I won't be. I'll take Garrison and 2 of his most trusted men. We'll be in and out." She looked at him, her corporate mask completely gone, leaving only a raw, desperate vulnerability. "Henry, if Mike was involved in my husband's death, if this has been going on for that long..." He crossed the room in 2 strides and put his hands on her shoulders. His touch was firm, grounding. "One step at a time," he said. "We set the trap. We get the drive. We find the truth. We don't let them win." She nodded, drawing strength from his steadiness. For the first time since Richard's death, she didn't feel completely alone in the storm. Late that night, Eleonora stood in the silent, cavernous study of her mansion. The room was just as Richard had left it, a museum of a life cut short. With Garrison standing guard at the door, she retrieved the external hard drive from a locked drawer. It was cold and heavy in her hands, a small black box holding a universe of secrets. She connected it to her laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating her pale, determined face. A single box appeared in the center of the screen. "Enter password." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed his birthday. Access denied. Their anniversary. Access denied. Clara's birthday. Access denied. She tried every significant date, every pet name, every private joke she could remember. Each attempt was a painful reminder of the life they had lost. After the 10th failure, a new message appeared. 2 attempts remaining before data is permanently erased. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 2 chances. 2 chances to uncover a truth that could be a year old, or to lose it forever. She stared at the blinking cursor, the ghost of her husband separated from her by a single, impossible word. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Eleonora. 1 attempt left. 1 guess stood between her and the ghost of her husband, between a forgotten truth and eternal silence. Her mind raced, a frantic catalog of their life together. Birthdays, anniversaries, the name of the street where they first lived. All of it was wrong. All of it was the past. Richard, the engineer, the pragmatist, would have chosen a password that was logical, unbreakable, and forward-looking. Her hands trembled. She couldn't do this alone. She pulled out the burner phone and dialed Henry's number. "I'm locked out," she said, her voice a strained whisper, the sound of defeat. 1 try left. It's going to erase everything on the other end of the line. Henry was silent for a moment. She could hear the faint sound of his breathing, a steady rhythm in her chaotic world. "It's not a memory, Eleonora," he said finally, his voice calm and certain. "A man that careful, that paranoid, wouldn't use something from the past. He'd use a constant. Something that was always true. A constant. The word echoed in the silent study. Her gaze drifted to a silver-framed photograph on the corner of the desk. It was Richard, years younger, holding a tiny Clara in his arms, her face a perfect, trusting circle, as she looked up at him. He was pointing at something beyond the frame, at the sky. He called her his North Star, Eleanor whispered, the memory rising up, clear and painful. He said while everyone else was running in circles, she was his fixed point. His true north. "Is that it?" Henry asked gently. "True north?" "I tried it," she said, her throat tight. It didn't work. Her eyes scanned the desk, searching for a clue, for anything. They landed on a small, engraved plaque Richard had received for a breakthrough in navigational software years ago. It read, "Ad astra per aspera," through hardship to the stars. The stars, the North Star, Clara. Then, it hit her. A memory so specific it felt like a jolt of electricity. Richard was teaching Clara the constellations. He'd bought her a small, powerful telescope for her 7th birthday. He was so proud of it, boasting about its specifications, its model number. "This is the best one, sweetie," he had said, ruffling her hair. "The Celestron Power Seeker 127 EQ. It'll show you the whole universe." A string of letters and numbers. Impersonal, unbreakable, a constant, hidden in a memory of love. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing with a certainty that came from beyond herself. Power Seeker 127 EQ. She hit enter. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the password box vanished. A file directory bloomed on the screen, a list of documents and encrypted folders. She had found it. She was in. "Henry," she breathed into the phone. "It worked." The files were a roadmap to a decade of deceit. It wasn't just a design flaw. It was a criminal conspiracy led by Mike Evans. He had been systematically replacing specified, high-grade materials with cheaper, substandard alternatives in dozens of projects, pocketing the difference through a web of shell corporations. The fatal flaw in Richard's car wasn't black ice. It was a brake line made from a faulty alloy that Mike had approved. Richard had discovered the entire scheme and compiled the evidence on this drive. His death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. The elevator sabotage wasn't the beginning. It was the desperate endgame of a man trying to silence the one person who could expose him. The next morning, the Ainsworth Industries boardroom was a theater of tension. Eleonora walked in, her face a mask of cold composure. Henry, in a borrowed suit that fit him surprisingly well, stood discreetly by the door, an observer no one recognized but her. As planned, the meeting began with Garrison presenting a fabricated but convincing case against Julian Croft. Emails were shown, and offshore accounts were mentioned. Julian paled, sputtering denials. Across the table, Mike Evans watched, a flicker of smug relief in his eyes. He thought he was safe. He thought the janitor's wild story had led them straight to the perfect scapegoat. He discreetly pulled out his phone beneath the mahogany table. In a server room 2 floors below, Garrison's tech expert saw the flag instantly. "He's making a call," he whispered into his headset. "Bouncing the signal through 3 towers, but we have it." "He's sending a text upstairs." As the board descended into chaos, Eleonora held up a hand. The room fell silent. "Actually, Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "you're not the one we should be looking at." She nodded to Henry. He dimmed the lights and connected her laptop to the main projector. The contents of Richard's hard drive filled the screen. Falsified safety reports, bank transfers, an email from Mike Evans to an untraceable address, sent the day before Richard's death, that read, "The engineer is a problem. Taking care of it tonight." A collective gasp filled the room. Mike Evans shot to his feet, his face a contorted mask of fury and panic. "This is fabricated. It's slander." "Is it?" Eleanor's voice was dangerously quiet. She clicked a final file. A recording began to play over the boardroom speakers. It was Mike's voice, captured just moments ago from his secure call. "It's done," he was saying to his partner. "They took the bait. Croft is going down for the elevator. We're in the clear. The company is ours." It was over. Mike lunged, not for the door, but toward Eleonora, his face twisted in a snarl of pure hatred. But Garrison and 2 plainclothes officers were already moving, intercepting him before he took 2 steps. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the stunned silence. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the lawn of Henry's small detached house. Ainsworth Industries, having survived the storm, was stronger than ever, rebuilt on a foundation of integrity. Henry was no longer a janitor. He was the head of the new Engineering Oversight Division, a position Eleonora had created for him, trusting his expertise and unwavering moral compass above all others. The gleaming Porsche was parked in the driveway, but it no longer looked out of place. It was just a car, part of a new, blended life. In the backyard, Connor and Clara were laughing, chasing a soccer ball across the grass. Eleonora and Henry sat on the porch swing, moving in a slow, easy rhythm. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing. "Did you ever think," she said softly, "that a warning shouted across a lobby would lead to this?" He looked at the children, their faces bright with joy, then back at her. "I was just trying to do the right thing," he said. "I didn't know I was finding everything I'd ever need." He stopped the swing and turned to face her. His expression was serious, his eyes full of a love that was quiet, strong, and real. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. "Eleonora Ainsworth," he said, his voice steady. "You are the strongest, bravest person I've ever known. You fought for your company, for your daughter, for the truth. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you." He opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond, but a simple, elegant ring fashioned from polished titanium, inset with a single, deep blue sapphire. "It's strong," he said, "and it's true. Just like us. Will you marry me? Will you let us build a family together?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, washing away the last of the grief and fear. She looked at their children playing, at the man holding her future in his hands, at the home they had built from the ashes of betrayal. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Henry Brooks, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. As he leaned in to kiss her, the sound of their children's laughter was the only promise they would ever need. They were no longer a CEO and a janitor. They were a family, forged in crisis, bound by courage, and finally, blessedly, home. And that's a wrap on this story. But you know, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Let us know down below what part of the world this reached today, and maybe one word that says how it made you feel. It's incredible to think we're creating this sort of map of emotions, together. What we're trying to do here is build a home for stories that actually matter. Stories about getting back up, about forgiveness, and that quiet kind of strength. If you want to help us build it, a subscription and a simple like goes a very long way. It tells the world that these stories are wanted, and it helps them travel to places we could never reach alone. I'm just so grateful you chose to spend your time here. Until we meet in another tale, try to be the kindness you want to see out there.